Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Maisres Pedikei Halacha Gimel. We're learning today Daf Mem Dalid. We are heading towards the end of the Masechta. We really left off on Daf Mem Dalid Amud Aleph, the second line from the top of the Amud, in the middle of the Mishnah. But we have to go back, and we're going to right now go back to the beginning of the Mishnah. The first machloikis in the Mishnah was about Temid. Temid in the Mishnah is the water that has in it the sediment of grapes, and I'm saying dafke, the sediment of grapes, because they also would make temed out of seeds. But the machlokes in the Mishnah is dafke about sediment, not about seed. Seed does not absorb as much water. Seed doesn't have in it the amount of liquid that we will suggest in the Mishnah that it has. We had a machlokes between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda, and we have to add some details, and for that we're going to review it right now in order for us to better understand what the Gemara will be saying today. So let's quickly go back. Daf Mem Gimel Amud Beis says the Mishnah, Hamisamet, someone who prepared temed, and again we're taking wine sediment or grape sediment, and we have water seeped in it. The nasan mayim b'midah. You put a certain specific measure of water, and after it's seeped with the sediment, umatza kidei midasai, at the end you have the same exact amount of water. That's the way we interpreted the Mishnah when we learned it in the last year. And what we said is not wrong, but it's very limited. We have to add. Quickly look inside the Marafulda, Daf Mem Gimel Amud Beis, umatza kidei midasai, says the Marafulda, lav dafke. The Tanakama's opinion isn't only, I think I spoke, you put in a liter and you got out a liter. No. And let's go like this. Even if you put in 3 jugs of water, and what came out at the end, because of you placing sediment in it, sediment is filled with juice, you at the end have 3.5, even if you have more, but it's not in the ratio of 1 to the 3 that you had. You don't come out with 4, you only come out with 3.5. So then, Potter, it still will have the status of water. Why is that? Because the real shiur of yayin mazug, the minimum, in other words, they would dilute their wine from Chazal with water. What would be the ratio? People had different ratios, but the most watered down wine would be that they began with 1 measure and they added 3 measures against it, which means at the end of the mixture, the original was 1/4. So that's the meaning, this is very important, of the Tanakama's opinion, that if you seeped the sediment in water and you came out with the same amount, says the Marafulda, doesn't only mean you came out with the same amount, even if you came out with more, but you did not come out with this ratio of 3-to-1. So he's giving a great example. You put in 3 jugs, you had it seep in sediment for however much long it took, and at the end you have 3.5 jugs. You don't have 4. That's where the Tanakama says, well, that's still called water. On that, Rabbi Yehuda says, no. Rabbi Yehuda says you have to tithe it. Why? As we spoke out, because really he's saying something very rational. I know you began with 3, you came out with 3.5, but who told you that you only have a half from the sediment? No, I'm going to argue that you have the measure of 1/4, maybe even more in what you took out, but you only have 3.5. Yeah, shkoyach, because some of the water went into the sediment, some of the wine went into what you have, some of your water went into the sediment. The ratio that you're looking for of you having minimally for it to be wine, 1 portion of wine, and on top of that 3 portions of water, you have that over here. Okay, so that I just wanted to add this thing that we didn't speak out. And now, when the Mishnah says at the end of Daf Mem Gimel Amud Beis, according to everyone, Matzah Yoser Al Midasai, what does it mean, Matzah Yoser Al Midasai? Look inside the last Marafulda, that you put in 3 jugs, and you took out 4 jugs. So now you did take out the measure. So on that says, now, according to everyone, this is wine. Now, how do you tithe it? So the Mishnah writes on top of Mem Daled Amud Aleph, Moitzi Olav V'Markam Acher Lefi Cheshbon. So again, when we learned the Mishnah last year, we said, you separate maisres from another place. Why do you separate maisres from another place? Let me go with this. You put in 3 water, you have 4 liters now. You have 4. But how much from the 4 is really sediment? Only 1. So what do you have to tithe? Only 1. 2% from the 1 liter. Then the 10% from the 1 liter. Now, does that mean that you cannot separate tithes from this mixture? So says the top Marafulda, of course you can separate tithes from the top mixture. What do you think? Every time you have wine, it's the same thing. Wine in the times of Chazal was watered down. What happens if someone did not separate trumas when it was still concentrated? They should have, but they didn't. And now they mixed it. They don't have to take off trumas from other concentrated wine. No, you take it out from this mixture and it's perfect. Because if I'm taking out 2% from this mixed up, so the water that's going out is for the water that was there. The proportion is the right one. So that's the top maraful. It's not that you have to separate trumas u'maisres from other concentrated sediment, no, or from wine. No. You can take out trumas u'maisres from it. But if you are deciding to take out trumas u'maisres not from this mixture, but from another place, then remember that if you have 4, only a quarter of it has to be tithed. And make sure that you use that to measure the 2%, the 10%, etc. Okay, now we properly review the first part of the Mishnah. Now let's quickly go through our intro. The second part of the Mishnah will be about an ant heap, which is fascinating. For people who were here by Masechtas Peah, we had a similar discussion when we were learning Peah. And here the issue is that you go into an ant hill, if that's what the name of it is. Brazil is filled with it. And you find in it kernels. When do we say that the kernels that were in it came from a heap that has to be tithed? Maybe the ants took it from a farther away heap. Now, I want to say something important. All kernels, I need some more coffee, have to be tithed. But if it came from a heap that was smoothed, if the kernels came from grain that already had Gemar Malacha, then you are not even allowed to snack from it prior to you separating the tithes, right? If it came from a heap that was going to be merchandised, for example. If it came from another pile of grain that was not smoothed, I'm not saying that you're putter, but then you can snack from it. So how do we determine? And we'll see that we say that the ants took it from the most nearby They take it from that which is closer to them, as we'll see inside the Mishnah. Another few details that we'll have in the Mishnah, that normally, guys, imported produce, in other words, imported meaning we're in Israel. When we're learning this, we're in Yerushalmi. So even if we know, or even if produce is imported, that means it grew chutz la'aretz and it was brought into Israel, the rule is, if it grew in chutz la'aretz, it doesn't have to be tithed. Rabbinically, the rule is, if it was imported to the Holy Land, it has to be tithed, because the buyer won't know that it grew in chutz la'aretz. But the Mishnah will enumerate various items that was not grown in the Holy Land. These items, when you found them in the markets in Israel, you knew that it's importado, that it came from who knows where. And therefore, you don't even have that rabbinic obligation. Final topic of the Mishnah will be about inedible seeds. We already had that before. Inedible seeds are completely exempted from it being tithed. Really, inedible seeds are also exempted from the restrictions of Shvi'is, as we'll see. And finally, the rule that Gedulei Truma is only if the source is edible, as is many seeds when they're soft. But if you have Gedulei Truma, but it's coming from a seed that's inedible, then we will not say Gedulei Truma, as we'll elaborate when we learn it inside. We're going to begin the Gemara focusing on the beginning of the Mishnah that we just reviewed inside. And here's the big question. The big question is, Alex, how do you know, according to Rabbi Yehuda, if you hit the right ratio? I get Rabbi Yehuda's logic. You put in 3, you got a 3.5. Says Rabbi Yehuda, who says it's only a half? Maybe there's a lot more from the sediment. Maybe not. How would you know? So really, there is an elaboration. Once you hear that, everything clicks. And that is that only wine ferments. If the temed is fermenting, that we'll call that circumstantial evidence. that Rabbi Yehuda is going to be used. If it's fermenting, it means it has the right ratio. If the sediment got too watered down, it wouldn't ferment. So it's not just you put in 3, you got in 3.5. By the way, the Mishnah, we also learned the Mishnah correctly. When you put in 3 and you got out 3. There also, Rabbi Yehuda says you have to tithe it. Why? Because you have in there a lot of sediment. But how much? Maybe you don't have enough. You have to add this detail. It's about it fermenting. And really, we're gonna quote a Mishnah from elsewhere. We're going to prove that that's the meaning of Rabbi Yehuda, which would also mean that the Chachamim hold that even if temed is fermenting, if we do not know that it has the right ratio, if we don't know that, you put in 3, you got a 3.5. Could be the half, could be there's more than a half, could be not. If you don't know, the Chachamim hold, even though it's fermenting, you don't have to tithe it. That will be clarified, Bishitas, the Chachamim. We'll leave it at that. There's a couple of more details, but it's a bit late, so let's dive right away inside. We're going to start now on Daf Mem Daled Amud Aleph, 2 lines from the second line from the top of the Amid, in middle of the Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, you have tunnels, tunnels. I'll call them, and I'm saying the word mountains because in Brazil, my friends, it's mamash a mountain. And whether it's, and under the mountain there are tunnels, and it's a city. It's fascinating. What Chazal say, Hayinu, we would have learned work ethic from ants. Another thing about ants in Brazil, also from the Mishnah, that during the summer they work at night. In order to be able to get a good day's work in, it's too hot during the day. And that's they overnight it. So you have an ant tunnel. And even if only one overnight, it was on the side of an arema, it was a side of a pile. What type of pile of grain? A type of pile, hachayeves. Hachayeves means that's already chayev to be tithed. Why? Because it was smoothed. So let's speak about someone that's planning to sell their grain in the market. So we learned that earlier in the Masech, that their Gemar Malacha does it. And that's the key. It already had Gemar Malacha. Overnight, there's a new ant colony. And then the next morning, you go into the ant colony and you find kernels. So the Mishnah says, Harei elu chayavim, the kernels that you find in the tunnel or in the mountain or in both, halachically is presumed to have come from the smooth pile. And therefore, you chayiv, you can't even snack. Sheyodua, because it's known, shemidavar gomur hoyogoririm kalalayla, that they were dragging it from the Gemar Malachad pile that was nearby. This is extremely important. Now, there is a chiddush. What was that? Oh, for sure. The pile, well, according to the opinions that hold that produce that grows in the Holy Land, even if it belongs to a goy, has to be tithed, the goy owner doesn't have to tithe it. But you later have to tithe it, then you have to tithe it.
The ants derive the grain from a pile that was smoothed by a human in Eretz Yisrael.
I'm sorry?
The ants get the grain from a pile that had been smoothed by a human.
By the owner. Yeah. Now I want to say like this. What happens if the pile nearby was not smooth? That's a big question over here. So what does that mean? If it was not chayeves, if it was not smooth. So we'll see that tomorrow. It's not so simple. Some opinions hold that there is a concept of yush, which means that when the owner discovers that ants stole some kernels, they give up finding it. And guys, we learned that if there is yush before Gemar Malacha, even though you later found it, a human found it, a Jew found it, those items never have to be tithed. I want to just add that in there. Or you can snack from it. We'll leave that for tomorrow. Right now, the Mishnah is only speaking out this side, that if the ant tunnel was near the smooth pile, well, there was already a chalois chiyuv. Let's go with hefker. Even though the ant stealing the kernels, the owner despaired and he gave up ownership, hefker is not going to be an exemption for tithing. We kept on learning this. If hefker happened after the Gemar Malacha. Now, there's a lot more just to open up, to remind ourselves. We have this a lot in the Bavli. Many times, we have a conflict of two logics, of two instruments. One is called roiv, one is called karev. Majority rules in halacha. Nearby also rules in halacha. The chiddush of the Mishnah is that even if around, let's say within the proximity of of a kilometer. There are many other piles that are unprocessed. That's called roiv. Ants do travel. They don't only go nearby. So you might think that there's a conflict. The closest one was processed. But in that vicinity, the majority were unprocessed. And if that would be, then we're going to have a proof from our Mishnah that if you have to choose majority, proximity trumps. But really, in the Bavli, the Gemara speaks this out, and it says it's not correct. We don't care about the majority in the close proximity because that's the nature of ants. They're very diligent. They don't waste time. They will not go to the ones farther away. They will only go to that one. We don't take the other ones in the close proximity because as far as the ants are concerned, they're going to have to waste time travel. Why would they travel if they don't need to travel? They're gewaldige workers. And again, the overnighting is because they work overnight. And the chiddush is that even if you find a huge amount, so you would think if there's so much kernels, Mistama, they began already stealing it, stealing it, however you want to call it, a couple of nights earlier. We don't say that. Before it was, we don't say that. Ants in one night can build a whole Eden project. In other words, just because you found a lot, it doesn't mean that they began a long time ago. It means they began last night and they just did gewaldige work. We'll leave it at that. It's like, wow. Okay.
What does this honest flattening of the pile?
Not the smoothing is one of the final. You're coming in the middle. It will be hard. It's a final step called Gemar Melacha. From that point onwards, you have to tithe it. Yeah. Okay.
Final stage of the processing.
The final step of the process, even though there are 6 steps afterwards, but that's going back.
The halachic significance rests on that.
That's right. One of the stages. When you're merchandising it, that's all that counts. If the owner is going to planning to sell it. Now, again, speaking about rabbinically produce that was imported into Israel, even though I know that it grew in LA, it has to be tithed because the oilam doesn't know. People don't know where it came from. But items that are known not to grow in Israel, which are the next cases in the Mishnah. Shum balbechi, garlic of balbechi. Either bechi is a name of a location, or bechi, which means to cry, is a certain species of garlic that's so sharp that when you eat it, you cry. So they call it the master of tears, whichever one. So this type of garlic, these garlics did not grow in the Holy Land. And ubatzel shel richpa, either richpa again is the name of a place. Richpa means to flow, or richpa means that makes your eyes flow with water, with tears. Ugrisin hakil kim, Sicilian beans, va'adoshim hamitzri is a certain type of lentil that's called Egyptian lentils. Rab Meir adds af hakirikas, chevre what's kirikas, a type of cabbage or a type of bean, a machloikis. And Rabbi Yossi also adds af hakotnim, whatever kotnim is. These are all legumes, items that grow. These items were not growing in the Holy Land when the Mishnah was put together. So here says the Mishnah, here we don't have to have the normal rabbinic rule that since it's imported, you have to tithe it rabbinically. No, everyone knows it didn't grow in Israel. Beturim and amaisres. And another din, we're going to equate meiser to shvis. V'nilkachim mikol adam b'shvis. Produce that grows outside of Israel is b'chlal not bound by the laws of shvis. So even though the one who's selling it is a person who's suspect to not properly obeying the laws of shvis, beginning with he doesn't allow his properties to be open for everyone. He guards his fields. And normally you're not allowed to buy produce from such a person. You could buy these items because they are known to have been growing outside Israel and they don't grow in Israel. I'm saying that because if the circumstances changed, if now they decided to grow these things in the Eretz Yisrael, then the law changes. It's all because of this rule that people knew that it grew outside the Holy Land. Now, moving on to the next topic in the Mishnah. Zera lufa elyon. If you remember luf, where did we have luf so much? Maybe in Masechta Shvis. So luf is a type of onion. So the seeds of this lufa elyon means either it means wild luf or luf that grows in highlands. Zera karshinim, seeds of leek. Zera b'tzolim, seeds of onion. Zera lefes v'tzinoinoi, seeds of turnip and radishes, the ones that are hard. V'shar is eiroinegin, and all other garden seeds. What we are talking about are seeds that are not soft, seeds that maybe were soft, but now she'einam necholim, they are inedible. So rule number 1 is they are exempt from maisres. They are exempt from maisres. And rule number 2, again, we are equating. We are equating Maisres to Shviz, Vinel Kachem, Mikol Adam B'Shviz. You can purchase it from any person. Because since these seeds are not food, they are not subject to Shviz. And this really brings us back to the first mission in this Masechta, right? The three criteria needed for something to be chayiv in Maisres is oichel. It's not oichel. Now, hold on. Now comes the big chiddush. We already had this rule before, that non-oichel doesn't have to be tithe. But here comes the chiddush of the Mishnah. And prior to reading it, let me just remind everyone that you have a rabbinic rule, gedule truma, truma. Someone planted truma, which they shouldn't have, rabbinically. Everything that grows has the status of truma. That's the rule. Now comes the exception. Now we're speaking about these seeds that are inedible, that are truma. Now the question is, how are they truma? If they don't have to be tithed, how are they truma? So two ways of understanding the case of the Mishnah. Number one, just the last ones, the seeds of turnips and radishes. We just learned this. Originally, the seeds are edible. So either we're speaking about seeds that used to be edible. While they were edible, they were designated to be truma. Then they became hard. That's one possibility of how would you have inedible seeds that are truma. And then there is another concept, which is already debatable in the Gemara, which is if someone took these inedible seeds and they said truma, they were not chayiv. Many have the opinion that if something is declared to be truma, l'chumra, you have to treat it like truma. For people not to take truma lightly, even though really it's not truma. Whichever case, if you have these inedible seeds and they are truma, afal pisha avihem truma, avihem means the tata. If you planted it, so the father is truma, and there is a rule, gedule truma truma. Says the Mishnah, we don't say that over here. Hanei elu, the plants may be eaten, meaning may be eaten even by non-kohanim, because we do not say gedule truma if their source is inedible. That's the big chiddush that we did not have until now. And atkan, the Mishnah, and now the Gemara is going to go back to the first topic that we quickly reviewed today, which is important, that we have a machlekes, Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda. Let's go back to the normal ratio of Bisman Chazal, of Yayin Mazug, which was what needed to be done for you to consume the wine. The most they ordered it was they put 3 portions water to 1 portion wine, which means the wine amounted to a quarter to a roiva of what you have in your cup. And the case of the Mishnah is you're making temet, you're putting wine in sediment, not in seeds, because seeds have very little moisture in it. So Rabbi Yehuda wouldn't work. You put it in sediment, even though you did not get out the ratio. That's the way we learn pshat in the Mishnah. Not you got out exactly the same amount. You put in 3 liters. You got a 3.5, but 3.5 is not enough, according to the Tanakama. So none of it has to be tithe. And again, Rabbi Yehuda holds no nishtazoi. We don't say that. You have to tithe it. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Abo. Now the following either or sometimes Rabbi Abo said it in the name of Rabbi Lazar. Other times he said the same din in the name of Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Chanina, which by the way just means that Rabbi Abo heard it from both. So b'shem oimroi, sometimes he quoted one, sometimes he quoted the other. He says, when does Rabbi Yehuda say that you have to tithe it? We understand the Rabbi Yehuda's concern that maybe there is more juice from the sediment than you know. Don't think it's only a half. No, maybe it's a 1.5. What do I know? There's only 3.5 of water and you began with 3. Like we mentioned, maybe some of the water parked itself inside the sediment. Yeah, but how do you know? So this is the word. That if the temet fermented, that is where Rabbi Yehuda says that even though it has the same volume, meaning it doesn't have an additional quarter, you're going to be chayiv it because fermentation indicates that it contains the right proportion or the right ratio. Because if it doesn't have the right ratio, the Chachamim don't argue with this. If it doesn't have the right ratio, you have to know the mitzias of winemaking. It will not ferment. Now, this already is also machadesh, the Tanakama. So the Tanakama is not denying that. The Tanakama is saying that, don't forget, it's not wine. We have to know it is. Temet is not wine. It's ois gevepta hoishanas. It's ois geklapta hoishanas. In other words, you already made wine. So the fermentation, don't think that temet was wine. Temet was much cheaper. The Chachamim hold, if you don't have clearly, you put in 3, you got out 4, we're not going to be chayiv to be ma'aseh. Okay. Now we're going to have a Mishnah in Chulin, and we're going to see whether it has to follow the Rabbi Yehuda, whether it can follow everyone. Says Tamon Taninon. Over there we learned in Masechtas Chulin that hatemet at sheloi hechmetz. We're going to learn 2 dinim. Din number 1 is Ma'aser Sheni. Einoi nikach bekesav Ma'aser Sheni, which is very simple. Ma'aser Sheni means you have Ma'aser Sheni. You have the option of redeeming it for money. When you redeem the Ma'aser Sheni on money, you have to take the money and go to Yerushalmi, the old city, Ir HaKodesh, and you have to use that money to buy oichel or mashkin. You may not buy water with that. May not buy salt with that. By the way, we are learning in Amam Hilchos Erev, and we have similar ideas. In other words, what is needed to make an Erev Chatzeres? Oichel, something that gives you nutrition. Now, of course, we need water to live. We know that. But it doesn't have that type of nutritional elements that make it be called, that will allow it to be classified halachically as food. So you cannot buy with Ma'aser Sheni money water. Can you buy temed? So the Mishnah says, depends. If it did not ferment, you see, the Mishnah there doesn't even speak about the ratio. If it's not fermented, then halacha can water. If it's water, you cannot use Ma'aser Sheni. If it fermented, then you could buy it. The second din that we have in Masechtas Chulin is the din of mikvah. So Mashgacha Pratas, we had yesterday a shtickle mikvah basic class. What was not mentioned because it wasn't relevant yesterday is that if prior to gathering the 40 sa, prior to you having 40 sa, this is the rule. If 3 loig of mayim fall into what you have, not only does the water not count to hit the minimum required measurement, much worse, if you don't have 40 sa, and now 3 loig of mayim shu'uvim fell into the mixture, it invalidates everything. Interestingly, that invalidation is only mayim. What happens if wine falls into it? So true, the emesis, many people know these Mishnayos, and we learn it, Avelim, is that if the wine changes the color of the waters, that's a problem. But normally, when you're speaking about, we said yesterday that one of the most chamur opinion of what is 40 sa, 700 liters. If you have 3 loig of yayin falling into 600, let's say, and 50 liters, it's not going to change the color of the whole thing. If the other liquid did not change the color, it will not invalidate it. So now you have temed that fell into the mikvah. It means 3 loig of temed fell into a gathering of make shamim that did not yet have memsa. Same idea. Since it's not fermented, so it's ruled as mayim. Mayim is poiselas hamikvah. Poiselas hamikvah. Abazak the Mishnah misha hechmetz. Once it ferments, then adarab. Now, even though it's not wine, but it's already temed. Ooh, temed you can buy with moist Ma'aser Sheni. The nikach bekesav Ma'aser Sheni, and also the beautifully the lakula the einoi poisel as hamikvah. In other words, the Mishnah in Chulin clearly states that the fermentation of the temed will classify it as wine, and the lack of fermentation will classify it as water. Says our Gemara, aha, even though there's no author in Masechtas Chulin, now we know who's that opinion. Not the Chachamim over here. Says the Gemara, Masnisa is the Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanin on Tamon, I know that Tamon means over there, but in Yerushalmi, they whoever made the statement, either that statement was made when they were learning Chulin. So when they were learning Chulin, the over there meant over here by Yos Masechtas Meisters. We learned over there, over here, Ha Mesamed, and Venos and Mayim B'Mida, Umotza Kedei Midasai, the way we chazered it today. Either you have the same amount, or even if you have more than the same amount, but it's not the ratio of 4, like you put in 3, you don't have the 4. Tanakama says, Mayim. Therefore, it's pater. Rabbi Yehuda is mechayiv, and on that we just learned Amar Rabbi Bohu. And sometimes the statement was said in the name of Rabbi Lazar, and sometimes he said it in the name of Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina. V'hu she'echmetz. So very important, divrei Torah. In other words, just because Rabbeinu Hakadosh didn't write over there in Chulin, Rabbi Yehuda, the Gemara is saying, it's Rabbi Yehuda. It's not the Chachamim. Okay, this is very important. Says the Gemara in Lav Dafka. Not everyone agrees with that. Daf Mem Daled Amid Beis. That Amar Rabbi Yosi, I will argue that the Mishnah there in Chulin if Rabbi didn't write Amar Rabbi Yehuda, because it's not only Rabbi Yehuda, the Mishnah over there is Divrei Hakel. Because when it comes to Meiser Sheni and when it comes to the din of mikvah, they don't follow the same track as Mesechtes Meisres, whether something has to be tithed or not. And he gives a Gavaldik Raya. When he's going to speak about Meiser Sheni, when it comes to Meiser Sheni, Shekain, Afilu Mei Melach, we just mentioned by Eruvin, you can't make an Eruv out of Mayim, you can't make an Eruv out of Melach. Very good. You cannot use Meiser Sheni money to buy Mayim. You cannot use Meiser Sheni money to buy salt. But if someone mixed the water and the salt, here there are people that when you buy things for Pesach, they sell you salt water. You pay like $18 for salt water. Why? Because they mixed it for you. And for Pesach. So if someone mixed water and salt, people would use that to pickle. So we view it as a dip, even though Mayim is not going to give you the nutrients for it to be classified as, neither does salt. But somehow when you mix them together, you could use Meiser Sheni to buy it. Is araya that when it comes to Meiser Sheni, if something could be used as a dip, it's considered food for Meiser Sheni. So argues Rabbi Yosi da Moira, I will tell you that even our Tanakama that will say it's not considered wine, you don't have to tithe it. Nevertheless, there is the flavor of this temet. There is the flavor of grapes. People use it as a dip. Since people use it as a dip, he will be moida. See, it's not that you can buy. You can use Meiser Sheni to buy it. Now, even though the Gemara doesn't go into the same back and forth when it comes to the mikvah, it must be the same thing. That only pure water invalidates the mikvah. And Rabbi Yosi is saying, Tanakama holds that if you don't know that it has the right ratio, you put in 3, you got in 3.5. How much sediment is in there? I don't know. Could be the ratio, could be not. Tanakama holds, well, if that's the case, we're going to say mayim. Yeah, but it's not the type of mayim that passes mikvah. It's a special din that what passes the mikvah? Pure water. It's taka mayim, but it's not pure. If it's not pure water, don't forget, no one is using these 3 loig to hit the 40 saw. You're just saying that it doesn't invalidate the mikvah. All of this makes a lot more sense if this whole din is only a midrabanan, but let's not get into Hilchas Mikvahs right now. Okay. Now, the next part of the Mishnah, before today's ends, was that if matzah yoitzer al midase, I think that was the lashon. So the way the Marafulda says, you had 3 liters of water, and you put sediment in it, and you let it seep, and then you remove the sediment, and now you have 4 liters. That's the yoitzer kedei midase. So the Mishnah says, moitzi olav meiser mimakam acher lefi cheshbon. The way we explained, you can tithe it. If you're going to remove tithing from another unconcentrated wine, then you only have to tithe a quarter of this mixture, because 3/4 is water. That's what the Mishnah says. Now, what do you need to do? Another big chiddush of the Gemara. You have to tithe it. Yeah, what exactly do you need to do? Generally, even though we do use the word meisres as a generic word that includes in it trumos, in our case, you don't separate truma. You only separate the meisres. And we're going to review something that we just learned a few daf ago, which is that truma, first of all, midoi raisa has no shear, right? That even one kernel exempts a whole pile. And even though the Chachamim gave you the 3 shiurim, 1 in 40, 1 in 50, 1 in 60. By the way, it's a machlekes Bisham and Beisilel. We learned this together. Bisham begins 130, 140, 150. Beisilel says 140, 150, 160. Nevertheless, it's not meant to be given exact on purpose. It's dafka meant to be given by approximation. And therefore, just like we learned before, that when a person separates the 2% of the kri, the balabas has in mind that should also cover the kernels that stayed in the straw, the stalks that were not put in the pile. Same thing over here, that when a person separates truma from wine, the owner has in mind that it should also cover, the truma should cover the little bit of wine that stayed in the sediment. So that was already toidemed. It was already trumad, if that's the word in English. So says the Gemara, Mahu Moitzi, when you do have the matzah yoisid al midasei, yeah, you have to separate, but only maisris. Only maisris. Hatruma loi. Why? Now we just had that shahat toidem, because when a person takes a truma, dafka, because it doesn't have to be exact, so you have a much better way of covering all your bases. Believe I, alakitin and va'al mashu b'toich hatzdadim. I'm sorry, va'al hatzdadim, va'al mashu b'toich hateven. I know these are words that are only shaykh to grain, but the same logic, the same kavana, the same idea is applicable over here. It's mamash gavaldik, and that's that. Okay, now we're going to open up the sugya. I'm just saying that since daf mem vav is a small daf, so I'm going to purposefully not go all the way to the bottom of the amid. Guys, there's only 2 days left after today. So like this, we're going to basically learn tomorrow the end of mem daled and part of mem hey, and that's going to give us the daf mem vav should not be a very small daf, but I want to open up this topic, and this is a huge machlokes. We already had this discussed before. There's a lot of lumdus in this, and let me go back. Okay, we can go back, Alex, and for those people who are coming on board right now, this is very important. Go through all the steps again. When produce is growing, if it was harvested before oinas hamaisris, it never has to be tithed. Even though you plan to eat it, objectively, it's so unripe that it's not called oichel. And in order for something to have to be tithed, it has to be oichel. And v'nishmad and gedul of min ha'aretz, but let's go back to the oichel. Once an item reached the oinas hamaisris, that's one word. Now, if and when you harvest it, you'll have to tithe it. Even though you harvested it, you don't have to tithe it right away. When do people usually begin tithing it? From when? From the Gemar Melach. What's the Gemar Melach? So we had many Mishnayos about it. The Gemar Melach would be, let's say, by kernels when you smooth the pile. The final step of processing it in the field. That's called Gemar Melach. Now there's another step which is extremely important to remember.
When it's tithed, or when at that point you are required.
At that point you are required to tithe it. That once you did the final step in the field, I'm going to use the English word of packaging it. Once it was packaged, the max of how it's packaged in the field. I'm saying that because the Mishnah spoke about people that would make big bundles in the field, but then when they would take it to the market, they would bundle it in smaller bundles. When it's in the big bundle, they are required to tithe it because this is the last step in the field. When do we only care about Gemar Melacha? If you plan to sell it. Now, we don't say you only have to tithe it when you hit the market, because anyone who's planning to sell merchandise would not mind if a purchaser will come to the field, they'll sell it in the field. The truth is that they will sell it even before it's packaged, but that's very unusual. Normally, people who would come to the field won't buy it before it's packaged, or they're going to want a discount before it's packaged. So the Gemar Melacha is the point that brings about the requirement if the items are going to be merchandise. Alex, this is for you. Now, if a person is planning to take it home, Gemar Melacha is of great significance, but it's not the final, it's not the end of the line. There's before Gemar Melacha, one status, Gemar Melacha. Gemar Melacha, then you have to have one of the following 6. Let's review. What is one of the following 6? Biblically, when it entered the home. If you are planning to take it home, only when it sees the face of your house. These are the words. Then, now, you are required. Before the requirement, you are allowed to snack from it. After the halachic requirement, you may not even snack. That's the big difference. Required or not, it's not just whether you have to do it. It's whether you can even snack from it. And then we learned, Re'iyas Pnei Chotzer, we're going to include in the Re'iyas Pnei Bayis. What are the other 5 items? Let's see if we remember. I'm going out of the order, but if you sell it, the fact that you sold it, even though you were planning to take it home, the act of the sale brings about the requirement, which, by the way, would mean that you have to tithe it before you sell it. You can't sell something that's not tithed. You have if you salt it. You have if you bring it on fire. You have if Shabbos comes. No, what's the 5th one? No, I just said 4. Rias Pnei Bayis, Mekach, Melach, Eish, Shabbos, Nu.
Putting in the basket.
No. That's Gemar Malacha. That's the Gemar Malacha. Rias Pnei Chatzir is included in it. Okay, it's a collective critique. We have to chop. There's one more, and we call them the Shisha Devarim. Okay, but now it's going to come to us. Not the Gabbai, not Yakir is here. That's who we need over here. But
conditions on which you,
that from then you are required, and that means that from when you are required, you may not even snack from it. Prior to the requirement, you're not allowed to have a proper meal because you didn't tithe it, but you can snack from it. And now let's go back to the Gemar Malacha. The Gemar Malacha by grain is smoothing it. The big question will be is if one person smoothed the grain pile of his or her neighbor. In other words, being that all produce should undergo its final steps of processing, to say that the owner is not content is inaccurate. Everyone is content when you did something that was going to be done. So the question is whether one smoothed the pile of the other without them knowing, whether that's valid or not, it's not a question of whether you need the owner's consent. Halachically, you have the owner's contentment or consent. Question is, do you need to have the owner's knowledge? Two different things. And there was no knowledge while it happened. So maybe since the owner did not know that in this case that the meruach was happening, maybe the meruach does not affect the Gemar Malacha. Machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. And this is this is going to be the sugi that we're going to continue to learn tomorrow. But let's read it inside. If a person smooths out, he does the final packaging to his fellow's pile of grain, but it was shaloi midatoi, without his knowledge. Again, we're not going to use the words shaloi b'ritzoinoi. No, because the owner was going to do it. That's the halach yelech. Rabbi Yochanan v'Reishon ben Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan Amar that affected Gemar Malacha nitbal. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Amar that nisht loy nitbal. Loy nitbal means it's not just about consent. According to Rabbi Yochanan, you need consent. He has consent. According to Shimon ben Lakish, you have to have the knowledge of the owner, and if you lack the knowledge, then loy nitbal. Now the big question will be, lishitas Reish Lakish, what's pshat loy nitbal? There's two ways of understanding Rav Shimon ben Lakish. Either that act of smoothing is irrelevant. It's as if it's not smoothed. But if the owner comes and he re-smooths it, which he won't, but if he were to do it, then it affects the Gemar Malacha. Or not, doesn't work that way. In other words, you took away the possibility of there being Gemar Malacha. That could be even more. Because why would you re-smooth it? It's already packaged. So since the Gemar Malacha happened ba'oifen, that it did not halachically affect the Gemar Malacha, this is an item that will never have Gemar Malacha. And can you just imagine people that are looking to circumvent have many other options. What they'll do is each one will do the other ones. And don't let me know. And we have the same thing by Challah. Chazal speak about the fact that if someone is looking for a way out, there are easier ways out. We're not talking about people that are looking for a way out. We're talking to Yidden that are looking for a way in. Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to go to the Holy Land. He wanted to separate Trumas from Isis. Chazal said that, but he didn't want to eat the fruit. He wanted to fulfill the obligations that you have for the prayers of Eretz Yisrael. Chevah, we'll stop over here. That's
Rabbi, the sixth is Tuma.
Thank you, Truma. Shkoyach. We're learning in the face, bepanim.